It's my privilege to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Stephen Guice. Dr. Guice grew up in various countries as a child. He lived in Peru and in England. He received his master's degree and doctorate at Michigan State University in linguistics. He's taught for roughly 17 years at the university level in English and linguistics. In 2002, he joined the Foreign Service, and he is currently serving in Kazakhstan as the acting public affairs officer. Dr. Guice has 9 children, and we are very pleased to hear from him now. So with that, I'll turn the time over to our speaker.
Thank you. Good morning. Let me just get this up. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a great pleasure to be awake. I flew in from Kazakhstan yesterday. Yesterday started about 12 midnight in Almaty, Kazakhstan, leaving, actually going and sitting in the airport, then flying to Amsterdam, then flying to Minneapolis, then flying to here, about 26-hour in the air en route, and it's just good to be here. It's also nice to be here because it's sort of, having served in Almaty for a couple of years, I grew up in Detroit, which is flat as dirt, but in Almaty, I've enjoyed sort of being able to orient everything according to the mountains. They're a little taller than here, about 14,000 feet, the Tian Shan, roof of the world kind of mountains. But it's nice being out here with similar sort of looking and feeling place, and I appreciate your time. Appreciate your listening to me today. I'll try to make it interesting. I have to say, in all my years in academia, not every guest lecturer is interesting, and I'll try to be interesting and entertaining a little too. Okay, a little bit, first of all, about what I have been doing, and then I just wanted to sort of introduce the Foreign Service as a career choice, to let you know a little bit about what's involved in the Foreign Service, in serving in the Foreign Service. And then I'll try to throw it open for questions for you folks too, in case you have any. Well, I like to roam, and I'm going to try to, I'll be tied down to the microphone. I'm a roamer. Okay. As he said, I grew up, studied, worked in academia. In about 1986, I was working on my dissertation for my PhD and applying around in various jobs. Before I go much further, I should introduce my son. John is with me today. He's the second of our 9, and he's going to be a university student in the fall, along with his sister. Anyway, 86, I guess fall of 85, I took the Foreign Service test, and I sort of was looking at a number of alternatives. I was applying at university jobs. I was applying for the Foreign Service, and I also was applying for Fulbright to go be a professor overseas in an exchange program. And the Foreign Service is a wonderful opportunity, but it's not a fast career choice. In that there's a long process involved. You take an examination. It's now offered. It just was offered in April. It's now offered every April. It used to be offered every September. I think the most recent time, about 40,000 people took the test. So it's a popular test. It's a nice way to spend a day. It's a day-long test. You write 2 sort of long essays. You do a lot of involved multiple choice questions on history and all kinds of things. Understanding America, understanding the world. Once you pass the test, assuming you pass the test, only about 5% of the people who take the test pass the test. Now, if you do the math, that's still a fair number of people, but it means that a lot of folks, some of whom are really hotshot, highly qualified people, don't pass it. I know that I was talking to the Kennedy Center folks, and they were telling me that there are classes and there are preparations that you folks work together to prepare for the exam. It's a good idea. I didn't do it. I just kind of walked in, took it in '86, passed it. The next stage then is you have an oral interview, and you will go to one of 4 locations around the country. I think San Francisco, Chicago, New Orleans, and Washington, D.C., depending on where geographically you're closest to. You schedule a time and you go there, and again, it's about an 8 to 10 hour day of examination. It's a little more hand-tailored to the particular needs of the service. It's fun. I enjoyed the second day, the full day of testing. You walk in, and the first thing they do is they give you a packet of information on a country, a mythical country. I think my country was Turistan. It was somewhere looked vaguely like Yemen or like Oman, I don't know. But anyway, it's called Turistan. And you have all this information on all the government and everything that's going on in the society. But you also have information on a particular project. And the idea is you're working with a group of 5 people. And you're looking at a project that the embassy is going to fund development projects in the country. And you're sort of arguing with a group of people for your project. And so in the briefing materials, you have a fair amount of information on the project that you're working on, and everybody else has a different project they're working on. In my group, I was doing a project with elementary and secondary education reform. Another person had a project on doing ecotourism in this one remote area of the country. The third person had a project working with a hospital, working with a drug company from the United States and a hospital in the capital city, trying to build a real research hospital and a modern hospital in the capital city. Fourth person was doing an American Studies Center at the National University. And the fifth person was doing a project building roads and bridges, in particular to try to reach this one remote region of Turistan. And this is a remembrance of the trivial, I guess. I'll try to make it interesting now. So you're given half an hour to look over all these papers. Then you meet for half an hour. Or no, actually for about an hour, you meet as a group. And everybody is arguing for their project. At the same time, everybody's working together. And you're trying to sort of build consensus. And after you've been doing that for about 5 minutes, they walk in the room, and there are 5 observers observing the 5 of you interacting. And after about 5 minutes, they say, oops, the money is less than we thought. Only one project can be fully funded. And so then as a group, you have to come up with a consensus for which project is going to be fully funded and which projects are going to be partially funded and to what extent. And then you have this process of arguing and working with the evidence, if you would. All of us were given packets with plenty of evidence, and we had to sort of work with it. Well, I'm happy to say the elementary and secondary school project got fully funded. You know, I convinced the group that that was the best thing. We also threw a fair amount of money into building bridges and roads, and threw a little bit into an American Studies Center and a tiny bit into ecotourism. We didn't do anything for the hospital. But on the other hand, the guy who was supposed to be arguing for the hospital began our session by saying, you know, I'll make it easier for all of us. I think my project is really bad. There's some real red flags with it, which while we applauded his honesty, we all sort of went, thank you. You know, it makes it easier for us. Only one project's going to be funded, and you just shot yourself in the foot. That's good. We worked together well as a group. 4 of us then got called. There were more tests, more things where you did sort of what-if situations. Okay, you're at a party, and a Libyan diplomat is also at the party, and he seems to be trying to talk to you. What do you do? All right, now he does talk to you, and now he wants to talk to you privately. What do you do? Now he says he wants to, defect to the U.S. What do you do? Well, most of it's pretty straightforward. They're just kind of testing your judgment and your general sense and that sort of thing. But anyway, at the end of it all, they offered me the job along with four of us in my group and all. When they offer you the job, they say, okay, we're offering you the job tentatively. We're going to do a complete search on you. But provided everything comes out okay, are you going to now take the job, yes or no? And if you're taking the job, there are 3 things you have to promise. 1, you'll go anywhere in the world that they want to send you. Now, a lot of people, that's as far as they want to hear, you know. By anywhere in the world, do you mean like not Paris? I'm okay with Paris, you know, maybe Milan, but, you know. 2, the second promise you have to make is basically say, I will do whatever job they give me in the Foreign Service. And again, that's where some people sort of go, but I don't want to be a consular officer. I want to write political démarches, or I want to, you know, analyze policy and, you know, do things like that. But to a certain degree, it's a little like the military. You go where they send you and you do what they want you to do. The third thing you have to promise is that you will publicly uphold the policies of the government. Everybody's allowed to have your own opinion, but when you're a Foreign Service officer, you're really not entitled to your own opinion, especially overseas, because overseas you may think that you're just speaking as John Q. Public, but you're not. You're viewed as being an official government spokesman, 24/7. You know, whether you're talking to people, talking off the record. By the way, since I work with the media, I might as well tell you there's the statement off the record. Don't believe it. I mean, off the record is meaning, you know, it doesn't really happen. You don't want to go there. But anyway, then they offered me the job. I said yes. They said, when would you be available? I said, tomorrow morning. You know, I can be there by 8. If you want me a little earlier than 8, I can be there, you know, earlier. But generally speaking, the process involved, it's sped up. It used to take about a 4-year time from the period when you were offered the job to when you actually started working, tended to be 3 to 4 years. It's gotten faster. We have an amazingly, I would say, one of the best secretaries of state we've ever had in Colin Powell, in terms of he understands the value of the Foreign Service, and he's working on building and strengthening the Foreign Service as a unit, and working on strengthening the individual, stretching people's capabilities by providing for them in a good way. And one of the things that he came in as Secretary of State, having read all of the various reports that have been done, talking about problems in the State Department and what should be done to fix them, and he's really gone out of his way to try to fix them. And one of the big problems was a shortage of officers. In particular, during the Clinton White House, there was a period when intake of Foreign Service officers really went way down, were very small numbers. To make up for that, Powell got passed what's called the Diplomatic Readiness Initiative, where for 3 years in a row, he's brought in a large number of people to try to fill the gaps. Now, it's worthwhile noting, well, with 9 children, you already know I'm probably not in my 20s. I am 47. When I joined the Foreign Service, I was 45. I have a friend who came in at 58. One of the features of the Diplomatic Readiness Initiative is that it's sort of, well, I think the Foreign Service was always open to a certain degree to more than like 18-year-olds. But one of the things that he's tried to do in the Diplomatic Readiness Initiative is to try to harness the talents and abilities of people maybe who it's a second career. Anyway, back to the 4-year waiting period. What are they doing in that 4-year waiting period? It's now cut down to about 18 months. What are they doing in that 18-month waiting period? Well, one thing, there are 3 kinds of clearances they're putting you through. The easiest and the quickest is a medical clearance. They're basically making sure you are ready to go anywhere in the world. When you come into the Foreign Service, you have to be worldwide available, so that no matter what, you could be sent to whatever, pick your exotic locale. Ouagadougou is one that everybody likes, and former Upper Volta, Ouagadougou. You could go to Ouagadougou and you'd be fine, or you could go to Paris, you could go wherever. The second screening that they put you through is a security clearance. Because of the fact that you do sometimes handle sensitive information, even secret information, they have to do a complete security clearance on everybody. Depending on how long you've lived overseas, that sort of adds to the time. That's why sometimes people have a sort of stretch it to 18 months. Doesn't have to be. I guess my security clearance took about 10 months, which was relatively fast. I'd lived overseas in Romania for a couple years during that period. I was a Fulbright scholar over there. But they basically have to go back and talk to people where you live, talk to people, find out about you. They also kind of check on your personal, a little bit of personal issues, because criminal background, drug use, psychiatric, those sorts of things, of course, are a concern, that they'll just sort of check and make sure that you're fine. Once you do that, then you kind of go in a pool. There are, what I'm talking about is what's called the Foreign Service Generalist. These are the people that take the exam. This is the career that I'm talking about. You go in a pool of generalists, but not really sort of one pool, it's actually 5 pools. There are 5 sort of specializations within the Foreign Service Generalists. Number one, the one that's maybe what you most likely think of as being the Foreign Service and what the Foreign Service started out as, is consular work. We have embassies and consulates around the world, and how many of you have lived overseas for more than 6 months? That's what I figured. Yeah, good. Well, all of you, how many of you went to a consulate? How many of you got in trouble and went to a consulate? Anybody? It happens. Well, it wasn't trouble. Okay, good. Yeah, trouble loosely defined. But one function of American consulates is American Citizen Services, where Americans overseas run into some sort of difficulty or not. When I was in Romania, we had our 6th child. We had him in our apartment. My daughter was 10 when he was born, and she held him while I cut the cord, so I tell her she's the pediatrician of record. I don't necessarily recommend it, but it was fun. We lived through it. It was good. I wouldn't do it with a first child. With a 6th, you have some idea of what you're doing, hopefully. But after my son Stefan was born, we had to go register him as a U.S. citizen born abroad. And so we went down to the American Embassy in Bucharest, about a 7-hour train ride away, and we registered him. And so he has a nice big birth certificate of U.S. citizen born abroad. In fact, his older sister, Therese, used to kid him all the time and say, well, Steffi, I can be the President of the United States, but you can't be because you weren't born in America. Well, and now he's got that certificate, and he says, no, I think I can be, and I can be President of Romania, but you can't be, Therese. So he's got something back on her. Another thing that happened to us while we were in Romania was we had all of our passports stolen. And so we went to the American Embassy in Bucharest, and we got new passports made, including one of Stefan at 11 days old. I'm holding him up. You can see my hand behind him. Couldn't do it anymore. He's 9 now, so it would be a little hard to hold him up by one hand for the photo. But anyway, so a consulate does that sort of work with American citizens. A consulate... Well, I'll give you a consulate also will go visit Americans who are in prison, will go help Americans who are accused rightly or wrongly of things, will deal with Americans who die overseas. What happens? Now, in an extreme case, a friend of mine was in Lagos, Nigeria, and he happened to be the consul there, and he was on duty, and he got a phone call from a Marine Guard. Marine Guard said, there's a woman here who wants to report a death of an American citizen. So he went down to the gate, and there was the woman, and he started talking to her. He said, okay, so who is he? What, he got all the information, and it was her husband had died, and he was an American citizen. And they finished talking, and he thought he had everything done, and then she said, do you want the body? It was in the back seat of the car. Kind of cool. Happily, he didn't have to take care of the body at that point. I think he let somebody else deal with that. They had a mortuary they dealt with. But another thing, and a primary thing that the consular officers do, is issue visas to foreign citizens wanting to come to the United States, or for that matter, to in Almaty, Kazakhstan is now Kazakhstan is the third most popular country in the world for Americans to adopt children from. And so in Almaty, they do a fair amount of issuing new American passports to Kazakhstani kids who've been adopted into an American family. Consular work, then, is one of the five. Is there a board here? You can tell a former university prof because you can't keep him away from writing on the board, right? They call these 5 tracks cones. Don't ask me why. It's an awful name. But the 5 choices of career in the Foreign Service they call cones. And if you don't like the choice you make and you want to change to another cone, there's a process called conal rectification. But that really sounds just ugly to me. I don't want to go there. Well, we can conally rectify you. No, please. That would be bad. Okay. The next cone I want to talk about is maybe the second one that you most might think of as being a typical Foreign Service. That's political. The political officers do just generally that. I mean, they're working with political questions, broadly defined. What do you do as a political officer? Typically what you're doing is you're analyzing things in the country and you're reporting on them. Now, if you love writing, I mean, there are people that, and you're probably one of those guys, being a political science guy. If you love sort of doing analysis of stuff and trying to succinctly write it and get it back, that's a political officer's dream. Okay, so for example, I'll pick one from Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, we had, how many of you all know where Kazakhstan is in Central Asia? I'm sure you do. By the way, just to illustrate what hopefully isn't here, the trend, but in the United States, maybe, Kazakhstan was the site, supposedly, of the bad guys in the movie Air Force One. A friend of mine was at the movie, and a little girl and mother were walking out after the movie, and the little girl said, "Oh, Mommy, I'm so afraid of Kazakhstan. Where is it?" And the mother said, "Oh, it's okay, honey. It's a made-up country." It's not. It's the 9th largest country in the world. It's a big thing. But it was part of the former Soviet Union, so we're maybe not used to it yet. But anyway, recently, a political opposition party called Democratic Choice of Kazakhstan was trying to register as a legitimate party. This then is the sort of thing that the political officers get focused on, obviously, rightly. They met with people from Divika, they met with people from the government, they read materials written, and they reported back to Washington. And then Washington wrote back to them and said, "Oh, we want to know more about this and such." And then they researched that and wrote back. The political officers are working and doing that sort of stuff a lot of time. Another thing that political officers do in Kazakhstan, just to give an example, is Kazakhstan is the site where Russian nuclear arms were tested. It also was the site in the middle of the Aral Sea. There was an island which was commonly known as Anthrax Island because it's where the Russian biological weapons centers were at. Kazakhstan has been very supportive of the United States' efforts to get rid of weapons of mass destruction. They've been very committed to it from the very beginning. From independence, President Nazarbayev basically said, we don't want to have these weapons. We don't want to have nuclear bombs. They inherited, on becoming a country, they inherited a large nuclear arsenal. And they were very quick to say, we don't want these. We want to get rid of them. We want to dismantle them. We want to dismantle our nuclear testing. We want to dismantle our biological warfare production and testing. But there's still a lot of old stuff around. And so another thing that the political officers do is they work with various agencies in trying to decommission stuff and report on what's being done. Anyway, political officers then are the second cone. This tends to be, this is sort of the sexiest cone in some ways. That's the one that gets the most attention. Sometimes people, most ambassadors have come from the political cone. Most of the most highly recognizable American diplomats probably are people who came from that cone. Not only, but sort of. The economic cone is sort of the poor stepchild of the political cone. In that, again, these guys are doing the same sort of thing. They tend to be in the same part of the embassy. They tend to be reading some of the same things, but meeting some different people. But basically, they're doing the same thing. They're sort of learning about what's happening economically in a country and reporting on it. Yeah. These are the two big reporting cones by far, where that's what you're spending a lot of your time doing. A lot of these folks, well, maybe I'm being unkind, but a lot of them don't get out as much as the next cone, which is what I was in and am in. Public diplomacy used to be. It used to be there was a separate agency called the U.S. Information Agency, the United States Information Agency. Now it's been merged into the State Department. It always was with the State Department, but just sort of separate. This is public diplomacy. What are we doing? One thing we do is we work with educational exchanges, with cultural exchanges. We work with the media. Those are the primary sort of areas. But a typical political officer, I'm thinking of my friends in political officers, they maybe go to in a 2-year tour, maybe they go out to 2 or 3 different cities in the region once or twice. In Kazakhstan, we go a little more because the embassy's not in the capital, and so they have to go up to the capital city sometimes to meet with people in the foreign ministry. But a typical political officer doesn't get out a terrible amount. They're mostly analyzing information. I made, in the 2 years I was in Kazakhstan, I think I've made probably 50 trips to different cities in the country, which is fun. It's nice. You get out, you get to meet folks. In Kazakhstan, I was working with an exchange budget of about $5 million, where this is your tax dollars at work, but it's at good work. This past year, we sent 95 high school students from across Kazakhstan to the United States for a year for free. These kids are revolutionaries in a good sense. They come back and they have a very different way of looking at the world. They have a very different understanding. You know, you can read all of the textbooks you want about free market, but when you get over there and see it in operation, when you get over and you're in an American community, you change in really good ways. A student of mine in Romania, who was one of these flex students, expressed it really well. She was talking about how she'd been in Romania. They don't really have what you'd call customer service ethic. In fact, it's not that the customer is always right. I think in Romania the view is the customer is what? What is the customer? To illustrate, when you go into a shop, they don't say, hello, have a nice day, can I do anything for you? You know, are you looking for anything special? What they say is speak. Spunec. Only they're not quite that friendly about it. You know, it's like when you go to a store and you wait in a long line to get what you want, but you don't get it. You wait in a long line for them to give you a little scrap of paper, for then you go in another long line and you get to the front of that long line and you pay for the goods, and they give you another scrap of paper, and then you go back in a third long line and you get to the front of the line and they give you the goods. It's a bad system. Well, my student said, when I came over to the United States, she said, I couldn't believe it. In the United States, they want your business, and they understand. And she understood. She said she came back, and when people are rude to her, she'll go up to the clerk and she'll say, you know, I don't have to be at this store. I choose to spend my money at this store, and I'm choosing now to walk out of this store, and I'm not spending any more of my money here until you learn to be nice to people. Now that's what I mean by they're revolutionaries. I mean, they come back different. There's a change. Last year we sent 17 students over to study in undergrad university for a year. We sent people to get masters. We sent people who have doctorates to come over and do exchanges. We do quite a bit of work with educational exchanges. We also do cultural exchanges. We brought over in the last 2 years, 2 string quartets from Carnegie Hall, a modern dance choreographer who I didn't bother going to see the second time, I have to admit. But I did go see him the first time, and it was fine in its way. 2 modern music composers, those ones I avoided seeing. But, you know, I probably should have been there. We did 2 jazz festivals where we brought in some fantastic groups from across the world. We're planning another one for the fall. I won't have the pleasure of seeing it unless I go back, which I might just because I want to see what I worked on. We also brought over sort of American choral music fest program, 3 of those. Anyway, you get the idea. A lot of these kinds of exchanges back and forth. We do a lot of work also in small grants, in particular working with non-governmental organizations. So, for example, we've given a lot of grants looking at trafficking in persons, trying to stop trafficking in persons, trying to develop public service spots to let people know what's going on and to avoid kind of bad life choices. We've done stuff with election-related things, educating people about what's involved in elections, what's involved. I mean, it sounds funny, but I mean, university students in Kazakhstan, there have been occasions in past elections. In fact, it's been a regular feature of past elections that sometimes every university student in an entire university all votes for the same party and the same candidate, because basically the dean has a big student assembly and gathers them all and says, oh, you are all now Asar Party supporters, and you'll all be voting for this guy, and let's go over and I'm going to watch you fill out your ballots and we'll check them and turn them in. Well, obviously that's not legal, but it's done, and so some of the things we try to do is try to tell people about their legal rights, things like that. Anyway, that's public diplomacy. The other part of public diplomacy is press-related work. Now this is, again, I'm emphasizing public diplomacy because I've been doing it, and I think because it's fun, but that's another matter. The interesting thing about the cultural side of public diplomacy is that tends to be very long-term effect. A current favorite example we like to use is there was a guy from Georgia who was sent over to the United States to get a master's degree. And he came back, and he was one of these guys that really was revolutionized by what he saw, and he was very impressed and very excited and learned a lot. And he came back, and we kind of kept working with him and kept in touch with him. We do try to work with the alumni of our programs. And finally, after I think 5 or 6 years after he came over and got his master's, he was in the news recently. He's now the new president of Georgia, Michael Saakashvili. And also, interestingly, every member of his cabinet is somebody that went over to the United States on an exchange program. So that's big results. There's a big effect when you do stuff like that. But, however, it's a long period of time. I mean, you're talking about 5, 10 years down the road, maybe something will happen. In particular, if you're talking about somebody like a high school student. We're, by the way, you may wonder, how do we choose the high school students? It is a nationwide, very fair, rigorously fair competition that they're involved in. That in itself is an amazing thing in a country like Kazakhstan or in a lot of the third world countries where everything is not done on the basis of fair and free competition. Everything instead is done on the basis of who knows who is related to who, what connections do they have. The Flex program is very different. It's a fair, free competition. Okay. The other part, as I said, the press part, is very different because there you're not talking about here we're doing something that in 5 or 10 years there'll be these kinds of results. Or here we're doing something that we've got to do all this work so that in 3 months this can happen. The press tends to be about a 5-second, no, I'm exaggerating, but there's about a 5-second lifespan. And it's like, oh my gosh, something's going to happen. What are we going to do? Quick. Oh, and you do it, and then, okay. And then they forget about it. And you move on to something else. But the press stuff is very interesting. You, as a public diplomacy officer, you are the information officer at the embassy, and the public affairs officer at the embassy is the spokesman for the embassy. Everything that's being said by the embassy has to be cleared by that person and has to be sort of organized and put together by him. They also field some stuff from U.S. media, but certainly from a lot of media work with media from the other country. Okay, the last area. This is probably the least appreciated in some ways, but in some ways the most important. Living overseas, as all of you know, takes more time, doesn't it? I mean, when you, I was talking to a friend of mine when we were in Romania was trying to get his car registered, and he did a flow chart on getting his car registered. There was a 10-point process he had to go through to get his car registered. It's not like, here you just go down and pay the money and that's it. But it was about a 10-point process. And at one day I saw him and he was really excited. He said, I got the fax this morning. I said, is this to get the paper? And he said, no, this fax is to get the paper, to get the paper, to get the paper, to get the paper. But he was excited. He was like, but I got the fax. And only 4 more steps to go. Being overseas in the Foreign Service would be relatively worthless. You would be ineffective if you had to be spending all of your time worrying about, electrical shortages, which are frequent. We in our first house in Romania, we had 30 power outages a day most of the time, and we had a generator, and so it would go off and on and off and on and off and on 30 times. And if I had to go take care of that, that would mean I couldn't do anything. If I had to take care of all the kinds of administrative details that are necessary, it would be hard to do. This is really the job of the administrative officers. They oversee the warehouse operations, the human resources operations, every kind of area. It's terribly important, and it really does allow the work of the embassy to go forward. Now, beyond that, these are the generalists. I'll talk about specialists later because that's a different process, but remind me, I'll come back to specialists briefly. So you take the test, and when you do, you designate what you want to go, where you want to go. Do you want to be consular, political, econ, admin, or public diplomacy? Then you pass all the tests. Your security clearance is done. The choir sings hallelujah, and you go right in. No, you go in a pool and you wait. And depending on your test results, you fit in a pool. And there may be, sort of depends. Could be 150 people in there. When you get in and they say, you're 65th out of 150. And so you think to yourself, okay, there are about 98 people per class. There are about 9 classes a year. Okay, I'm not too bad. I should be able to get it in X amount of time. But the problem is that pool is constantly having new names added in as people get their clearance. But still, generally what happens is you're in this pool, and as soon as they have a spot available in a class, you go in a class. All in all, like I say, the average time for that, from taking the exam to starting to work for the Foreign Service, I think is about 2 years. 18 months to 2 years, something like that. Once you go in a class, then this is where it gets a little similar to maybe it's not quite like the military, but there's some similarities to the military in that you get in a class with 90. Well, there were 97 in my class, and somewhere in the third day of class, they gave us a list of 97 jobs, and they said, you 97 people are going to be in these 97 jobs. And so then you start making lists. And the first time around, they give you choice of 25. And so you kind of go through and you rank your 25. And if you're smart, you talk to your family members. A friend of mine didn't. He was working for me over in Kazakhstan while he was waiting to get in the Foreign Service. He got to his A100 class, which is, like I said, this 7-week intro class, basically. And he didn't really talk over with his wife where he wanted to put down. And so his number 3 choice was Lagos, Nigeria. The minute he put it down as a choice, all of us went, Rich, I hope you want to go to Lagos. You're going to Lagos, man. You put Lagos number 3, you're going. He's going to Lagos. Not that there's anything wrong with Lagos, Nigeria. That's fine. I have friends who are Africanists who love it. Typically speaking, people like to kind of go in a particular area of the world, and you have choice. Like I say, with 97 jobs, I had a lot of choices. It so happened we had a whole bunch in Western Hemisphere. We had a lot in Brazil. We had a bunch in Argentina. We had a bunch in Guatemala and Mexico a lot. We had nothing in Canada, sorry. Nothing in Washington, D.C. We had a smaller number of jobs in Africa, but still a fair number in Africa. Then we had some in South Asia, so in Pakistan or India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan. We had some jobs there. Near Eastern affairs is sort of the Arabic, the Muslim corridor kind of across North Africa, and then it's the Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula. We had a relatively small number of jobs available there. East Asia and Pacific went all the way down to Australia, all the way up to China, Mongolia. We had, again, a good number in China in particular. Then Europe is Europe and Eurasia. Kazakhstan is part of that. Russia and all of Europe then is also. And the rest of Central Asia is all in that European Bureau. And again, there were a number of jobs there, a number of things that were available. We, like I say, you're choosing 25 and you're rating your top 25 in the order in which you'd like to go, and you hope that you won't get the call, but it's possible that if a particular job is not chosen by anybody, you might get the call. You know, they might say, well, We noticed you didn't put down Chad on your list, but no one else put down Chad, and you've got some French, so we're going to send you to Chad. So there's a possibility, but generally speaking, they do try to work with people's wishes. Once you're in the second time around, basically the list is smaller. I just got through doing that. We had a list of hundreds to choose from, and of that I had to give them a list of 10 places I wanted to go, which wasn't bad. Only 5 could be in any one area, so I had number 1, I think, was Kiev, Ukraine for me. Number 2 was Kiev. Number 3 was Ekaterinburg, Russia. Number 4 was Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. Number 5 was Moscow. And I got my number 4 choice, which is not too bad. Now, some of you may be wondering, just in terms of family size. Like I say, I do have 9 kids. There are some Foreign Service families with more, but not many. Typically speaking, people sort of get scared. Well, the administrative people in the embassy get scared when they hear I'm coming. But I would say the Foreign Service is quite family friendly. They go out of their way. Certain things go according to the number of family members you have. So, for example, the size of your dwelling place is on the basis of what rank you are in the embassy in rough terms, which basically has to do with the type of job you're doing, in that certain types of jobs require a lot of entertaining. In the job I've just finished, we regularly had parties for 100 to 150 people in our house. That's a lot of people. And if you're going to do that, you have to have the space in your house to do it. And so on the basis of the kind of job you're doing, they'll sort of determine what roughly 1, 2, or 3 slot you go in. But then it goes according to the number of dependents you have. And so we got ridiculously, enormously large dwelling in Kazakhstan. Our living room in our first house was bigger than our whole house was when we lived in North Carolina before joining the Foreign Service. The living room was enormous, but still, it was big. It was bigger than our whole house, so that's pretty good. I think we had 9 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms. I mean, it was insane. Well, that's true. 6 bathrooms are 6 bathrooms still. They do take care of you in that obviously you and your family are tremendously important to them. Your performance as an officer, everything is kind of done for you so that they can get the maximum out of you in a good way. They don't want me having to pack up all my own things. Packers come and pack all of our belongings. It's very nice. My wife and I have been married 23 years, and I think we've lived in 27 different places. And almost all of those, I had to do all the packing and all the hauling. It's really nice having packers come in and pack everything up, and you just kind of watch them say, "Oh, be careful with that." It's nice. It's a nice feeling. They do take good care of you. They provide very nice educational allowances to help send your children basically to good schools that are available in the locale where you're going. Or if we homeschool. Yeah, we're even crazier than just having 9 kids. We have 9 kids and we homeschool them all. And there's very generous allowance that help us with the homeschooling. Even more ridiculous in one sense, I don't know. It's if you're traveling more than 14 hours to your post, you get business class travel, which is pretty remarkable. So now my 2-year-old, or my 4-year-old, I guess, she'll sort of sit down in an airplane seat and instantly kind of go, "Excuse me, bring me a drink, food here, please," right away. I hope she won't get too used to that, but anyway. Now the downside, now that's not a down. There's no downside, but at the same time, the reason that they take that kind of good care of you is so that you're available to work, so that you're able to do stuff. Like I said, so that I could come in and do a press conference on my first day on the job in Almaty. It's 9 a.m. on my first day, and they say, "Oh, the press conference is at 9:30," and I go, "Oh, great, thank you." But it's, I think, I would really want to strongly recommend the Foreign Service as a career to any of you, all of you. It is a commitment. You are not, you're not doing it for the money. You're well paid, but at the same time, you're not doing it just, for the perks. You really are doing it to serve your country. America really, when you're over here, you don't realize it. But I think when all of you, as you've been overseas, you realize the extent to which your safety kind of depends on how well represented America is in the world. And it's interesting that more ambassadors have been killed by enemy action than generals in this century. You wouldn't realize that necessarily. In Baghdad, in a lot of areas of the world, American diplomats are targets. But at the same time, I think we're doing an important job for all of us, representing the country. I did promise to come back and talk about the generalist issue versus specialist, and so I'll do that very briefly. What I've talked about here is being a Foreign Service officer, a generalist, but there is another kind of Foreign Service officer that's also very definitely a good career. And these are the specialists. And so it's a different process of being hired. It's a different process of working for them. You don't go through an exam to become a specialist. It's more like applying for a job. But there are people, for example, regional English language officers who, I think there are now 17 of them worldwide, maybe more by now. So, for example, in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, we have a regional English language officer who works with helping English language teaching programs in all 5 countries of Central Asia. There are specialists who are computer related. There are specialists who are security officers, specialists who work in human resources or in general services officers. And these guys are, again, there's a different process, but again, they're very definitely part of the Foreign Service, an important part. At that point, maybe the thing to do is to open it up to questions. I haven't talked a lot about politics in Kazakhstan, but I don't know if you guys want to hear about that. Any kinds of questions? Yeah.
I have a question. Yeah. I don't know if you mentioned it, but we're webcasting, so
Yeah.
while we can all hear, we can use the microphone so close to the light.
Absolutely. Good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, how come you've waited so long to join the Federal Service then?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question because I sort of hinted at that. In '86, like I say, I passed the exam, but I got a job offer from another place. So I went and I taught at the University of North Texas, and I just sort of kept the Foreign Service in the back of my mind and was happy to come back and take the test again, and here I am. I would say it was just something that I kept in the back of my mind as an interest, something I wanted to do. And that really is, I think, an advantage of the Foreign Service is that you can come in a little later if you want. Yeah.
Do they
Yeah.
do they have any requirements language-wise, or do you just learn it when you get there, or?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. I want to talk about it in two things. One, yes, it depends on the particular job, and it depends on really kind of on the job. Different jobs require languages, obviously, and different levels of language. For example, if you're the GSO officer working with the warehouse, while they could require and while it would be useful to have the local language, sometimes they don't. So for the administrative officers, they don't always require language, or they require sort of a lower level of language. For some of the jobs, much more is required. I'd say that the most demanding job language-wise, the most two demanding jobs language-wise are the people working with the press and people working in the consular section, because there you're really having to use your language. But now in terms of how do you get that language? Well, one, as I said, a lot of people come in with language skills already, and that language, those language skills can really help you get hired by the Foreign Service. So if you'll take a test, but if you perform at a certain level well, at the moment it's in a particular needed languages, difficult languages, but it includes things like Chinese, Russian, Arabic, others. That gives you an added advantage. And so my friend Rich was, I think, somewhere around 115th in the pool. And then because of his Russian, so he was about 115th in the pool, and he'd actually dropped a little, and he was thinking, oh, good grief, what's going to happen? You know, will I make it? How many classes will that be? That's 7 classes, but will more, you know, he was kind of worried what was going to happen. He's got good Russian, very good Russian, extremely good Russian. And so they tested, so that basically they all of a sudden decided to pay more attention to the language needs, and he went from being 115th to being 15th, which is not bad. So yeah, you get that added advantage in consideration for the job. You also get pay advantage to become fluent in a language. You get paid incentives for learning the language. I am a linguist by training. I have a PhD in linguistics. I'm also a linguist in the popular sense, in that I'm pretty good with languages. I had never studied a Slavic language at all. But I applied for Russian-speaking posts as my first choice because I wanted to study Russian. So I got 23 weeks of Russian, which isn't a lot, but 25 hours a week of intensive language training when you're getting paid a good salary is actually kind of nice. You know, for those of you who like studying and like learning, it's nice. And they do really work at it. They have very good language teaching techniques, methods, and they do try to really pay attention to that. Now, they also do pay attention to it in that when you're going on to another post, they look at that. And the post kind of has say whether they want you or not, and if you don't have the language, they're not likely to want you. But yeah, language is very important. In particular, in some jobs, language is terribly important. Did that answer your question? Anybody else? We can go as far afield as you want. Okay, here's a question here.
Okay. Now you're working on a salary basis. And just on average, do you think in 1 week's time, a month's time, are you working about just a regular 40-hour week, or is it a lot more than that?
It can be a lot more than that. It really kind of depends. Initially, actually, for the first 3 years, you're paid in principle, to quote the Russian, you're paid according to the actual number of hours you work. You do get overtime when you're first hired. After that, you're working whatever it takes. But, and this maybe gets into sort of the quality of life and family issues. It kind of can vary, but I would say a lot of people are working 45, something like that. It's not like being in a law firm and working 80 hours a week or something or other. It's reasonable. I mean, it depends on, for example, with the press, if you've got a particular thing coming up, it just has to be done, and so people will do it. The consular people typically are only working 40. Well, it depends, but I mean, theirs tends to be more of a 40-hour week type thing, except if they have emergencies or things that they have to get involved in. It's interesting work too, in that you'll go travel will take time, and that'll take you away on weekends or whatever sometimes. But I'd say it's not too bad. It's not onerous in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question. I was thinking about what your knowledge is on internships and probably what you would suggest on that.
Yeah, I think internships are a tremendous opportunity to get in the system in a really good way. It was striking that in my Foreign Service class, well, just to throw a bit of terminology, that the class that I was talking about, the kind of a boot camp 7-week thing that we go through, is called an A100 class. And we have a website where we keep in touch with each other around the world or whatever. The two largest groups of people, I'd say, there was a large number of people who were interns. And there also was a large number of people who were Peace Corps officers, or Peace Corps volunteers, not officers. I'll get the term right. Internship, I think, is very definitely helpful. It does get you so you're understanding the process, so you're understanding how the system works. And I think the advantage in particular an internship can give you is in the oral interview section, where instead of just talking theoretically or sort of thinking theoretically about whatever, you know the answers kind of already, and you're able to sort of give the right answer rather than muddling around. I'd say it's very useful. I also would recommend internships because I think it's a great way to kind of explore it a little bit and to get a sense of what it's like. Well, it probably depends on where you go, but the interns, we've got currently an intern in my office, my former office, I'm not there anymore, now I'm here, who's getting her father's in the Foreign Service, and she's getting a master's degree and also a JD in law school. And she's not like pushing papers. I mean, we're having her do some real substantive, interesting things, which will be helpful to her in whatever career choice she makes. But part of why she's doing the internship with us is because she wants to kind of explore the options. Having grown up in the Foreign Service, she's of course aware of it somewhat, but she wants to kind of look at it in more detail. Does that answer? Good.
Okay, the 18 months to 2 years from taking the test to actually showing up to your class
Yeah.
and then after your post, what do you do? Are you just kind of keeping
Treading
the same
water.
job? Are you working at the grocery store because you have nothing to do? Is the government
Well, a lot of
saying-
people are doing. Yeah, I mean, you've promised to go if they offer you the job, but you're just waiting. You don't have any money coming in from.
Okay.
You're and therefore, to speak for again what I was doing, I was teaching. I was teaching adjunct faculty member at a couple colleges in North Carolina while waiting. Frankly, that's a bit of a problem sometimes for some people. But the other issue is a lot of people will use the time to maybe finish up a second master's degree or do a little more education, or will be working. And many times, the good news is in your hiring, they look at what your work and life experience is, as well as your academic background, and all of that will kind of go, will help you financially, also in that, they do sort of give you credit for having done what you've done. But that actually is sometimes, that's why it's good that it's cut down. You can imagine what it was like when I was 4 or 5 years. I mean, that's really kind of crazy. And that's frankly why in '86 when I thought, okay, I have a job at the University of North Texas, or I can wait for this. And how long will I wait? I don't know. What I probably should have done was to take the job, but keep waiting for them to finish the clearance process. Because I was interested in Foreign Service back then even, and what the heck, it would have, as long as you're not sort of where people run into, well, it's not people run into trouble, but if people are sort of completely putting their life on hold, it's kind of goofy. It's good to kind of keep going ahead with what you'd like to do and planning and doing things, and then while waiting. It's not too bad. And with it 18 months, that's really better.
Do they like to hire people with just undergraduate degrees, or they prefer to have people with masters and PhDs?
That's the nice thing. It's not all of those your educational background, et cetera, comes into play in terms of the salary you come in at, the level you come in at, but whether you're hired or not is according to your performance on those tests. And so in my A100, there was a guy who was 21 who had just graduated from university, and he took the test, I think, as a junior, and then they did the clearance process while he was in his senior year, and then I think he maybe worked for 6 months somewhere while they were finishing up. And then there also was a guy in my class, like I say, who was 58. It was his third career. And actually, he got a kick out of it. Bob said, people were complaining that first tour officers are sometimes called junior officers, and some of the people in my class were complaining, I'm not a junior officer. It sounds demeaning or something rather than. And Bob wrote back and said, well, it's funny. When I was 26, I was a senior executive, and now at 58, I'm a junior officer. I said, I feel like I'm making progress. I'm getting young again. It really is a fair, and that's, I think, one of the really nice things about the Foreign Service Test. It's a free, fair competition. And people do come in with just straight out a bachelor's degree. At the same time, people do come in like me with a little more time, water under the bridge. Does life experience help? Probably. But in the sense that it helps anybody. But at the same time, you can pass the exam and go in and do it, no problem. That answer? Any other questions? Yeah. Oops, wait, we got the microphone. Oh.
Okay, I got a couple questions.
Okay.
Actually. Just talking about families. I guess my first question is, what would happen if a spouse wanted to live, say, in the Washington, D.C. area? How easy is that to arrange after doing a tour or two?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one is, are there posts that you could be assigned to where your families wouldn't be allowed to be there?
Mm-hmm.
As far as
Yeah, good questions. This gets into two issues. One, like I say, I did promise to go anywhere in the world they send me, and I will. But I always have choice, and typically, the general pattern is people will be overseas for 2 posts, and then they'll be in Washington after that for another tour or two. There are some people that spend almost their whole career in Washington. And it's generally easy enough to get a Washington assignment. Frank, going back to your question about the number of hours, Washington assignments often end up being more time consuming in that you're working longer hours sometimes there. Although I don't know, but maybe that's not true. In terms of, yes, clearly posts are, going in what the current state of a post is. And some places, for example, we'll pick on Algeria. Algeria, if you have a tour in Algeria, you're only going to be there 1 year, and you will not be allowed to bring any family members with you whatsoever. And in that year, you will have 2 R&Rs, where the government will actually buy your plane ticket and fly you out for free. Now, why is that? Because the security situation in Algeria is such that people are getting whacked, or have been in the past. There have been various things happened there. That could change, and it does change. So, for example, a friend of mine was assigned to Saudi Arabia, and he chose Saudi Arabia because his wife and his 3 kids would be with him, et cetera, et cetera. And then now they can't be with him. Now they've ruled for the moment that Saudi Arabia, you're not allowed to have any family members with you, and they've done what they call a drawdown at the post, where they try to send home non-essential people, and only essential people can be there. That happens. Generally, though, I would say you probably have an idea beforehand what it's going to be like. Although not always. A friend of mine was from my A100 class he applied to go to Indonesia, and he studied Indonesian, and he got there just in time for the Bali disco bombing. And he was the consular officer who had to go through and identify the body parts and help all the family members. That was heavy, nasty duty. And then right around, almost immediately after the bombing, his wife and kids were sent back to the U.S. They were evacuated because they said, no, it's not safe. Security situation here is deteriorated. And I think after 9 months, they came back. But that's a strain, and that's a real danger. On the other hand, they fly them out. It's not like you're having to pack everything and put them on the plane yourself. They really work hard at taking care of people. They house them and give them food, et cetera, allowance when they're overseas. If you go into a position knowing that you're going to be in a separated post, that's one thing. Maybe it's a little easier in that you can prepare for it. There are people that do that, but I'd say a lot of the separated posts kind of generally attract people that are wanting that. You don't find many people married with children who say, I'm going to go to Baghdad for a year, honey, and you and the kids, you'll be somewhere, I don't know. Take care of yourself, and I'll try to always wear my flak jacket. Although I know somebody who just did that because she looked at it as they were gonna buy a house, and she thought, okay, I'll go to Baghdad for a year, and we'll be able to buy that house because we'll get all that danger pay. On the other hand, danger pay is given to you for a reason because there's danger associated with danger pay. It does sound exciting, but no, my wife has informed me that I'm not going to Baghdad. It was interesting. They thought, in Baghdad, we're putting up probably what will be the largest U.S. embassy in the world will be in Baghdad. And the thought was that they may have to sort of assign people there, just take people who had Arabic or who had the skills and just assign them there. Actually, they ended up having, I think, like 5 or 6 times the number of volunteers they needed. And so they had to really kind of sort through and say, no, I'm sorry. I know you've got Arabic, but we can't use you there. You're going to have to go to the other place. So, did that answer? Other questions? Oh, we didn't even get into poli-sci. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
This is great. I guess just one final question that I had was, if you, looking back on your experiences you've had so far, what has been your best experience, or is there anything that sticks out in your mind that's made everything worth it?
Well, yeah. I've had a remarkable opportunity. My position level is, I'm a junior officer. I'm a first tour officer. And yet, due to various circumstances, I was able to come in and work in a position that originally, as the cultural affairs officer, that was a much higher kind of level than I should have been at. And I had a lot of fun doing that, and it's been great fun. And then actually, when through various circumstances 2 people didn't show up who were supposed to be there, I was doing a job that ordinarily is done by somebody. Well, the guy I replaced has been in the Foreign Service for 20 years and has served in a lot of really kind of high-level things, and I was doing his job and my job and another guy's job. And it's time-consuming, but it's very, very rewarding. On a couple levels. I think a simple level like the exchanges, it's a tremendously rewarding experience to know that you have the opportunity to cooperate with something that takes somebody from a village, some kid who's living in a village and who doesn't really have a future, and you've done something amazing for them and for their country, and that's a wonderful feeling, very rewarding feeling. To be able to have done things that can really have a tremendous impact is a very nice thing, and it's worth it. It's exciting. I wonder if that. It's sometimes also paperwork. Yeah.
I just want to know, is being an FSO one of the only ways to become an ambassador? Are there other routes to that?
Actually, yeah, that's easy to address. The easiest and most certain way of becoming an ambassador is become a tremendously successful businessman and give large amounts to both parties, both political and both presidential candidates. Now this is because typically speaking, and by the way, you'll get the juicier plums are typically the political appointees. Typically, under Clinton, I think it was about 40% of the ambassadors were political appointees. Under Bush, it's down to about 20%. But still, the only guaranteed way to be an ambassador really is to make a lot of money and give it to a political candidate who wins, and then go be the ambassador where you want to go. To be an ambassador as a Foreign Service officer is a possibility, but you really kind of have to be in the right place at the right time. To use which sounds nice in the abstract, but it's not always so nice. My current former ambassador, Ambassador Larry Napper, was the ambassador to Kazakhstan when I served there. Wonderful man. He came in 30 years ago to the Foreign Service. He was he was a consular officer in Moscow, and he kind of kept working at it. He ended up being the deputy chief of mission, so the number 2 guy in an embassy. He got his chance to do that, and he arrived in Bucharest, Romania, and he was the acting ambassador, the chargé d'affaires, because the ambassador was a political appointee who hadn't gotten there yet or something or other. And so he arrived in Bucharest, and he was the acting ambassador for about 5 weeks before Ceausescu got his Christmas present. If you remember, Ceausescu and his wife, he was the dictator of Romania. Ceausescu and his wife on Christmas Day were executed by firing squad, and it was broadcast on national TV. Quite exciting. So Larry Napper was there right when the revolution took place. Well, that's an opportunity. And because he happened to be there when that situation took place, and it was tremendous unrest. I mean, there were people shooting, there were bullet holes in buildings near where Americans were. Because all of these things were happening, and because he did very well, he was the DCM of the year in Bucharest. That then made it so he was going to go be an ambassador somewhere. So it's a little bit of two things. One, you have to do a good job wherever you're going, but then also you have to have a little bit of lightning strike if you want to be an ambassador. You have to be in the right place at the right time and do well with it. And then what do you know? You keep rising up. That's good. But I don't think if you're entering the Foreign Service with I think it's good to have the idea, it would be great to be an ambassador. But there are a small enough number of countries, and there are a lot of people in the Foreign Service, and if your whole goal is to be an ambassador, then give the money, be a political guy, but at the same time, I think no matter what, you will find it a very enjoyable and rewarding career.